All right, guys, what's up? It's Jack, and welcome back to another video. So in this one, after now that the play test has officially ended after day 2, I want to specifically talk about one aspect that is very important to so many different members of the community across the board, and that is the time to kill, or TTK. Because as you guys know, it's been increased to where it's a little bit longer by about 20% or so. And I want to get into that. Now, first, I want to reiterate why it was implemented that way as far as the playtest is concerned in the first place. And that's for two reasons. Number one, basically, if somebody gets first hit on you, they have, it doesn't guarantee them the kill, right? To where they just require much more consistency. So that way the person who has the more consistency in a gunfight to be able to actually deservingly get the kill, as opposed to, oh, you shot me first, you're pretty much guaranteed to get the kill, right? Okay. Because that's not what Splitgate is. That's more of a Call of Duty thing, if you think about it. Like, usually the first person who gets a shot gets the kill or whatnot. It's one thing to have an advantage if you get first shot, but it's another thing to where it pretty much guarantees the kill, right? Okay. Now, next up, another reason was also to kind of give the players that are getting portaled behind to kind of be able to react and kind of trying to even the playing field, as opposed to, oh, somebody portaled behind them, they're instantly dead or whatnot, stuff like that. So I want to go into this more because it's even more of an important factor now, especially after day 2, because yesterday's video was after day 1. So I guess you can say these are my time to kill impressions after day 2, because in day 2, okay, in which you're probably seeing the footage of this here now, I ended up switching weapon types, and I ended up switching from my regular usual assault rifle to a precision weapon. And I was basically using the jackhammer and the carbine. Those are the ones that I usually go to. And immediately I can tell you that I was noticing a difference with the change of this time to kill, as well as it's the combination of two things: the change of the time to kill, as well as the fact that the screen bobbing has pretty much been eliminated, as well as recoil being more predictable across the board, across every single weapon type, as well as the fact that the recoil itself is predictable, right? So it's been reduced and it's predictable. The combination of these three things are, in my opinion, right now, in terms of my personal experience, are what are making precision weapons that much more viable. And we're not just talking about at their optimal range in terms of their longer distance engagements, but we're also talking about closer distance engagements as well. Another thing that I think isn't talked about enough, despite the fact that it's literally the elephant in the room, is the fact that you've got multiple inputs in this game. And I would say 70 to 80% of the people who play Splitgate 2, regardless of whatever platform they're on, they're playing on controller. And obviously the other 20 to 30% are playing on mouse and keyboard, right? So that is also something to consider, because again, across every single first-person shooter out there, I think it's safe to pretty much admit that if you're using a very specific type of weapon type, depending on what input device you're using, obviously you would have one advantage over another, right? So you guys get the deal with this. I mean, there's nothing new there. You know what I mean? I think pretty much everybody knows that if you're going to go into crossplay, there's always going to be that in mind, right? It's never going to be fully, completely balanced simply because of the fact that you have different kinds of inputs, right? Okay. So now, with that being said, it's totally understandable as to why they did something like this. And I have to say, at this point right now, this could be an issue. Now, first of all, this particular video, other than my personal experience in day 2, I also realized in one of in the stream that one of my viewers basically said, who asked for a higher time to kill? And this is actually a very viable question, because, well, nobody really did. But I know that eternally it's probably a hot topic. But I think overall the time to kill was in a good spot to where it was previously. And actually, if you take the changes that pretty much everybody and their mother pretty much agrees on as far as this playtest is concerned, I think we all agree that the lack of screen shaking, or whatever you want to call it, or screen bobbing, is a good thing, as well as the recoil being predictable and only going upward, and as well as the fact that it's been slightly reduced across the board. I think we can all agree that those are very good changes, and they're very smooth changes regardless of whatever input you're on. So I think that's obviously a good thing that pretty much everybody will agree with across the board, right? Okay, cool. Now, with that being said, you've got the additional factor of the time to kill change, right? In terms of the playtest, right? Not in the build that we have now, but in terms of playtest. So I think, honestly, like, here's my theory. In my theory, I'm thinking to myself, okay, what if the time to kill was not changed to where it was originally, but you changed the other factors that we agree on, right? I think that in and of itself is enough to make a difference across the board. But I think that with the higher time to kill, I think it really makes the precision weapons that much more viable than what they were previously, and it could knock things off of balance because, to my knowledge, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, to my knowledge, I think assault rifles are probably the most popular weapon in the game, but I don't think it's because they're the most quote unquote powerful. I think it's because they're just ease of access, plus they're fun to use. They're fun to use, they're very addictive to use. So, and I think with the changes of the no screen shaking and the recoil changes, I think that they're going to be even more fun to use. However, I think these changes are enough by themselves without changing the time to kill necessarily to still make the carbines and the precision weapons more viable. But I think we'd be closer to something more balanced as opposed to something that's a little bit more one-sided, because a lot of players, especially when you're looking at, you know, the majority of players, which are the casual players, a lot of them will say that some of them might say that assault rifles need a buff simply because of the fact that, you know, at certain ranges, it's just too much of a pain in the ass to try to take somebody out. Now, granted, you want to use precision weapons for those kinds of engagements, but at the same time, it's like, I kind of get where they're coming from. But, but again, with this particular, another thing I wanted to mention was with this particular, especially, and again, I'm a controller player, so this is referring to me and the other like 70% or 80% of other players that are using controller as well. As far as controller players are concerned, it's like, it feels like, obviously the Sabrask, with the time to kill being increased by 20%, the Sabrask assault rifle I think is still in a pretty good place. But as far as the other two assault rifles go, I think a lot of players would say that it would just takes a little too long to get that kill, especially when you consider the other factor that I mentioned in terms of, you know, the precision weapons, right? And also what's very interesting is I wonder how submachine gun players feel about this. Now, obviously, submachine gun players shouldn't really be trying to pick people off like across the map or anything like that. That's not the way submachine guns are meant to be used, and especially since this game is Splitgate and it's not COD, right? There has to be like a difference in terms of how you engage, everything like that. So a higher time to kill, as I mentioned in my previous video, does, you know, obviously kind of separate the weapons a little bit more. So like if you're closer and if you have a shotgun, you're that much more likely to get the kill, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I get that, but in my mind, I can't help but think that, again, these basic changes that have been implemented without a change in the time to kill would be significant enough to make every weapon across the board feel that much better, depending on, you know, who's using it and stuff like that. But there's also part of me that thinks that maybe, and again, this was also mentioned by somebody else on stream as well earlier today, that maybe a happy medium might be like, if you're going to increase the time to kill on weapons for the reasons that were meant to be in there in the first place, I wouldn't be surprised if like a 10% increase was a better idea in terms of pacing instead of 20. I understand the reason for the 20. I get that, but especially when you consider casual play and when you consider pubs, 10%, if you're going to decide to increase, I think 10% would be that really good happy medium, because again, you'd still feel it, but you wouldn't feel it as much to the point where it can get to be an annoying, a nuisance, right? Because, you know, again, when players, especially your casual players, when they get, and they're, you know, if anybody gets annoyed, right, they're just less likely to either use that weapon type that's less viable, or they just get annoyed with the game, period. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, Splitgate needs to keep its identity, but at the same time, going back to the original question, who asked for a higher time to kill, you know, nobody did really. But I know that I know probably internally that this was a topic. But again, with all due respect to the super hardcore and the super competitive players, when it comes to something like pubs, you know, you can't have too much of that competitive DNA flow into the casual space, because all of a sudden, you know, the potential of the game, one like this that can be so versatile on both sides, ends up being too one-sided, so to speak. And this is coming from a person that really doesn't mind a skill gap or whatnot, but I've also, just been playing games long enough to know and to understand on both sides how valuable it really is. And it's not just because of player count and stuff like that, but it's also because of the fact that, it's also a fun factor thing. You know what I mean? Sometimes the competitive settings in a game can actually impact a person's fun either more positively or negatively. And again, when you're talking about, your casual player, they want to, they want to have fun in the game regardless of, how they play, right? Which is why the changes that have been implemented are actually a step in the right direction for the most part, in my opinion, in terms of, the perks and stuff like that. There may be some rebalancing in terms of, which perk you can use for which slot or whatnot, but it's a good thing because it's given the people more variety. But when you start to get a little too competitive, a lot of that variety gets taken away. So again, when you have a time to kill that's significantly higher, that impacts a certain weapon class a little too much, whether it's positive or negative, obviously, it's something that could, in theory, at least take everything off balance. So again, I'm trying to look at this from both a competitive as well as a casual standpoint, but ultimately where I belong is a casual standpoint, because I'm not a competitive player. I just happen to be a casual who really likes this game and just plays it a lot. And that's it. At the end of the day, that's it. I can't compete with competitive players. I'm not on that level, right? So I'm looking at it from both sides, right? Because I understand both sides, and I very much am familiar with what things are like competitively compared to what they are casually. Because again, with Halo Infinite, I played nothing but ranked for a couple of years, before this game came out and before X Defiant came out, and somewhere in between. And as well as I've been watching a lot of competitive players play. I've been watching a lot of competitive players videos, streams, and stuff like that. So I have a pretty decent idea of the mindset that kind of goes beyond that. So I get it and I understand it and I understand the importance of it. But you also have to consider the majority of players. And it's very easy for the majority of players to get easily annoyed by a change that is meant to be small but makes the biggest difference for them. You know what I'm saying? To whereas with pro players or whatnot, for instance, or the competitive players, they'll be open to the change and they'll adjust, et cetera, et cetera. And then they can give you the feedback and stuff like that. But they're gonna stick with something and see if it really works out, compared to the player that will, usually just get annoyed and stop, and if there's a specific type of weapon that a casual player likes to use, that they just don't, they don't want to use whatever weapon of class for whatever reason, which is understandable, so it's like, you see what I'm saying? So you have to hit that really nice middle ground to where it feels good on both sides. So my humble opinion is, at least try, like at first, I would recommend that things go back to the way they like the time to kill shouldn't be changed, right? This is scenario number one. Don't change the time to kill, but change all the other aspects, because again, all those other aspects are very a very welcome change, which can make a difference across the board, regardless of the skill level of the player or whatever weapon they use. So I think that those two changes of the screen shaking and the way the recoil works are a big enough change across the board. And scenario number two is, if you were to increase the time to kill, increase it by, like, let's say 10% instead of 20, and see how everybody kind of reacts to that. You know what I'm saying? So I would be open for both of those. Again, like I mentioned in my previous video, there's a lot of things that I do like about the time to kill on the playtest with the 20% difference. But at the same time, again, when I'm looking at everything across the board, it's like, well, this could become a potential problem with very specific weapons in a very specific weapon class. So you're kind of widening and combining the fact that not every weapon class is locked to a faction anymore. But at the same time, again, if a certain weapon has been nerfed a little too much because of the time to kill, to a point to where a person who really likes that weapon class doesn't use it anymore, then it's kind of like you're limiting the game's potential in that aspect. So you're taking a step forward in one way, and then yet you're taking a step back. So it's like, how do you improve it? So I think a smaller step forward, either by increasing it by 10% instead of 20, would be like something that would be closer to home. Or at the very least, I think first it should be tested to where, let's not increase the time to kill at all to where it is already, right? And just implement the other changes and see how that works out, right? Because again, you can't just be looking at, the competitive side of things. You also have to be looking at the pub side of things, right? The casual side of things, because all competitive players might say, hey, yeah, the time to kill does need an increase, but then you'll say, then the other 90 to 95% of players who play casually are going to be like, no, the time to kill does not need to be increased. So that's what I wanted to mention here and talk about here, because again, as you can tell, there are so many different variables. And up until day 2, this really made me think about this that much more in depth as soon as I made the change to a different weapon class. And then once that happened, I started feeling the change and seeing the difference and performing differently, all of a sudden I was like, okay, now we have something that really needs to be thought over and discussed about in this manner. And that's why I wanted to make this video. So with that being said, I want to know in the comment section down below, whether you've just played or whether you watched, I want to know, like, what do you guys think in terms of the time to kill? Do you welcome the change to 20%? Do you think 10% would be something even better if it were increased? Or do you guys think that they should just revert it back to, just keep it the way it is, but at the same time implement the changes that have been implemented in terms of the recoil and the screen shake? I personally think that would be a first really good start to go. But for me personally, I obviously could go either way, because I love the game. But the thing is, you got to look everything across the board, right? So if there's a certain aspect of the game that becomes less fun because of a small change, then it's like, okay, let's make that change a little bit more small to where it does make a difference, but not enough to the point to where it ruins the experience for 90+% of your players if they agree. So with that being said, guys, I want to know where you stand on this and how it felt for you. And as always, I like to thank everybody for taking the time to watch and or listen. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.